Plenty of ideas flashing around then about the origin, the consequences, and the response to the mosquito population in Queensland. We'll start with a question here in the middle.
Can you explain what a non-compliant water tank is relative to mosquitoes?
So a non-compliant tank may mean that someone has played with the exit pipe, entry pipe. The actual mesh on top of the tank is usually black. It's a visual cue for the mosquitoes to actually go to it. If anyone has actually taken that mesh off, it's quite difficult to get back on in the compliant way, and that gap will allow mosquitoes to get in and out. What kind of happens as well quite quickly is the exit mesh over the overflow builds up with algae, and people often poke that out. And so the mosquitoes come up through the exit piping, and they're very good at finding water. They'll come up metres and metres of piping to find the water. They'll just follow the vapour.
Add on to that. You can go to stores like Bunnings and find cheap knockoff, like 100 litre, 200 litre rainwater tanks for garden use. And you know, the screens on those things aren't necessarily built to code. They don't necessarily always fit all that well. And then you get the do-it-yourselfer who decides to rig up his own sort of rainwater storage system, primarily for garden use. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens in Brisbane. We get through another big El Nino cycle and to see what happens.
Thanks, the fascinating presentations. Just a quick question, and largely I'm asking if you could sort of verify whether this be true or not. My understanding was that years ago we used to put a layer of diesel on water tanks, but the formulation of the diesel was different, so it didn't flavour or make the water smell. And we can't use that anymore because it's a different formulation, so the water's foul. Do you know if there's anyone else sort of doing some work on that as a simple, practical method of keeping our water tanks safe?
Yeah, there are some silicon products that you can use. Unfortunately, you need to determine when these tanks fill and they overfill, that top layer often pours out.
A question for Scott. You're introducing a virus into a new species, or presumably in a situation where mutations are likely to occur reasonably rapidly. So what does the monitoring, what sort of monitoring are you likely to do to sort of see if there's going to be changes in the nature of the virus once it gets into once it's endemic in this new species?
So the Wolbachia is a bacteria, and there is monitoring go on. They do monitor the bacteria strain to see if there's any changes in it. And you know, they've only had it in the field for a couple of years. They've also examined the vector competence of mosquitoes that have been infected with that strain of Wolbachia. And the short story is that there hasn't been any mutation to the point where they're worried about it changing the mosquito response for WML, that is, and the vector competence. One thing to watch will be with popcorn. If you could somehow keep popcorn going somehow, there is a chance that it would attenuate so that you would select for a more attenuated strain. And one thing I didn't mention when I taught, I'll bring up right now. Going forward this next year, we hope to use a new double infection of Wolbachia with two different strains of Wolbachia. That's going to be somewhat of a halfway between popcorn and WML. So it'll have the fitness of WML, and it'll have the dengue blocking capacity of popcorn. That's what we plan to do.
Hello, my question is for the first speaker. As I understand, with the Wolbachia male version of it, it's very successful in spreading because it pretty much eliminates insects from reproducing that don't have the virus. However, with the could you describe the interactions between male and male pup? Why does a male pup take over when all of them have the male, when male pup reduces the lifespan?
Could you paraphrase it? I thought you were talking to Nigel too. So male pop, you wanted to know why?
Yes. Why would the insects that have male pop, when it disadvantages the way their lifespan, why would it be more successful than the original male?
Why would it be more successful? Well, it wasn't. I mean, it dropped out. It dropped out of the population because of the fitness issues. The thing that we wanted to do with male pop was to see if we could get it in 100% in a small isolated population. So example, there's Aedes aegypti in the Galapagos Islands. There's Aedes aegypti and dengue outbreaks in Key West, Florida. And in Key West, Florida, they've been, the people from Oxitec who make a genetically modified Aedes aegypti using this technique called riddle, have been trying to get the regulatory approval to wipe out Aedes aegypti using this genetically modified strain. Well, you might be able to use popcorn to do the same thing without any of the sort of GMO sort of issues. And so that's sort of what's going on in the popcorn world. I don't know if that answered what you were really after.
Thank you.
Must be a question in some people's minds, and that's to do with the law of unintended consequences. What might happen with the Wolbachia bacterium as it becomes more widespread in nature? Might there be metafluothrin resistance develop as it happened with DDT and mosquitoes?
Yeah, sure. With metafluothrin, that answer's pretty easy. Sure, there's an opportunity for resistance to develop if it's used all the time. Yeah, absolutely. And it'd be like any of the other pesticide issues, and you know, you've got to come up with something different. We would hope to use it in a very prescriptive way in a restricted environment when there's dengue and around dengue cases. With Wolbachia, they have done studies on transfer of Wolbachia from the mosquito to other species, and that doesn't occur. You saw how bloody hard it was to get it into Aedes aegypti in the first place. It took a lot of effort to get it in. But, you know, there's always a chance we're monitoring. We've gone through APVMA approvals, Office of Gene Regulator for approvals. So we've done those sorts of things. And it's, I suppose, sort of watch this space, you know.
Yes, I think we do well to remind ourselves that we're a very clever species, but not necessarily a wise species. Anyway, thank you to our two speakers for that session.